Today, like I said, it's Gus Cornell, our cloud security architect. Gus, take it away.
Hey, thank you. Good morning, everybody. These series of talks are mainly about going to the next step on posture management. So we're going to be talking about the three things today: customizing the dashboard and some tips to get additional visibility on that. Customizing CloudBots. I've gotten questions from some of our customers that want to start making their own CloudBots, and they're not exactly sure how to add them into the system. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about intelligence essentials. If you don't know what that is, if you have posture management, you are getting, and you probably have gotten notice already, you're getting intelligence essentials, which is basically analysis of the logs that have to do with activity on the control plane. So let's go ahead and start. I want to differentiate what I'm going to be talking about from what conventional posture management is. Everybody that's using posture management normally starts with using it to finding misconfigurations, making sure that they are fully compliant with regulations, and they're enforcing best practices. And this is the core of posture management. Of course, it's where we start, but where do we go from here? And the reason I say that is because the posture management engine is an incredibly powerful auditing and inspecting engine. We can do a lot of things with it. We can get a lot of information from the cloud from it. So we don't need to stop at just misconfigurations or making sure that we're compliant with regulations or that we're following best practices. And that's some of the things that I'm going to talk about today. So when we go to the next steps, usually what I tell people is the very first step is leverage GSL and CloudBots, because we're going to customize how the engine is set up so that it can work for me or for our organization specifically, right? So instead of generally finding out if I'm compliant, I want to very specifically find out if I'm compliant. And when we go to that place, it's not about being compliant necessarily with industry or federal requirements, which of course we have to be, but specifically with things that are important to us. And that is exactly how our cloud is configured, what are people doing in our cloud, and going to specifics. These are the exact policies I want my roles to have in the cloud. These are the exact timelines when things should be running in my cloud. People that are developing or deploying things in the lab should not keep them running for more than 36 hours. It doesn't matter what those instructions or what those restrictions are. They're very particular, and there should be a way to enforce them. And posture management gives us a way to enforce them. And it's all about, again, customizing GSL, which is the way we query the cloud, and customizing CloudBots, which is the way we sort of remediate. So the first thing that I want to remind, and people that saw my first talk know this, is having some sort of tagging that we can use. And there is a limit to the amount of tags, of course, that we can put up in the cloud. In AWS is 10 tags, in Azure is 50, but the bottom line is that we don't want to use tags for everything willy-nilly. So what I normally tell people is have one taxonomy or classification tag that has a lot of information in a single tag. What type of information? We can have the administrator who's in charge of that object as part of the tag. In this case, maybe Peter Parker, or we can have a code piece for that. Maybe a billing code that's part of it. Maybe a project code that's part of it. Maybe a label that says what it contains any sort of critical, sensitive, restricted information. Maybe a label say that this specific item requires PCI compliance or requires HIPAA compliance, whether it can be allowed internet access or not, whether it's going to be allowed certain protocols or not. So there's a lot of information that we can put on a classification code. And the reason that it doesn't have to be English, the reason that we can pack a lot of information into a small string of characters is because posture management gives us the ability to search for these tags and specific parts of these tags. So we can have a GSL script or a GSL query looking just for items that have number 175 or 178 on characters 3, 4, and 5 specifically of our classification string, or that have project 329 as the specific characters in this specific location for a classification string. So once we have developed the rules for what our tag should look like, number one, we can find out if all the tags are being conforming to this. And number two, we can start generating reports based on these tags. So what does this look like? And I'm going to go ahead and actually show my dashboard right now, or one of the custom dashboards that I've been building. And the reason I started modifying this dashboard was because I had a number of customers asking me for several things. They wanted to say, hey, I want to keep track of elastic IPs in particular that are not attached to anything. So somebody that deployed something, then they deleted it, but the IP was left behind. And you're paying for these IPs, whether they are in Azure, whether they're in AWS, you're paying for IPs that are not associated with anything. You may want to keep those IPs, but you at least want to know that they're there and they're not attached to anything. Some people wanted to know whether users have not logged into their system for more than 60 days or 90 days, or whether there were API keys that had not been used in 3 or 4 months. Some people wanted to, again, we're talking about classification tags. Some people wanted to make sure they had a list of things that somebody created that were not fully compliant with the tagging system. They either had missing tags or the tags were formatted wrong. So they wanted some way to take a look at them. Other people wanted to see objects in an approved region. These are all requests that I'm getting. And the reason that I created a dashboard like this is because if you go to the home dashboard, the one that we give you, there's a lot of general information in here. You get a list of things with high severity. Yes, we have to have this, but it may not be showing us exactly what we want. So we can create a dashboard that is showing us exactly what we want. Everything in our dashboards, remember, can be moved around, can be reconfigured, can be resized, and the actual pieces of information that we show here can be customized to show the exact things that we're interested in. So we can generate a report and we can have it emailed to us, but each user can also customize the dashboard so it's showing exactly what is it that they want to see, whether those are events coming from log analysis, whether those are events coming from compliance, whether there are things about a specific reporting, like I want to make sure that project 178 is not using images that have not been approved, or I want to make sure that I know how many instances Peter Parker has deployed in the last 10 days, or I may want to know exactly how many roles do we have that give access to companies or tools or utilities that are outside of my cloud. And I ran that report against my specific system. And the only role that I found that does that is, of course, my CloudGuard, formerly Dome9 Connect role. So I know that my cloud is giving an assume a trust, has a trust share relationship with another system outside of my organization. And I know that because I have a list of roles that do that. If somebody creates a role that tries to peer a VPC or a VNet with something outside of my account list, they will show it here. If somebody wants to attach a new service that again is giving access, any kind of access to the outside, it will show up here. So these are all things that are fairly useful and all things that you can actually pinpoint or show in the dashboard. So one of the things I wanted to do is give people an idea of how I build these things. And the power or some tips behind it to facilitate doing that. For example, objects in unapproved regions, it was very easy. The GSL command that I use is instances should not have a region equal something on an unapproved list. And lists is something very powerful that we can do in posture management. In this case, I just went to my custom list area and I created a list. I called that unapproved regions. And then I listed 3 regions where I know I'm never going to build anything and I want the system to look for. I made those Mumbai, Bahrain, and Sao Paulo. And I, of course, ran it and it automatically found an instance in Sao Paulo, which is notifying me of. When you see this on the dashboard, you will always get the latest information. If somebody goes in and deletes this, or if we automatically deleted it, it will go away. If somebody creates a new one, next time you log in, you'll find the new one there. So these are not static. Everything you see in the dashboard, everything that comes from GSL, if it's part from our continuous 24/7 analysis, it will be continuously updated in the dashboard. When it gets remediated, those reports will go out. When the new ones pop up, new ones will come in. In case you don't know where this list generation is, I can show you real quick. We can go here. Let me go ahead and actually just open a tab. And let's go into assets and custom resources. If you go to custom resources, you're going to find the list there. And I have tons of lists here that do tons of things. Those things can be, again, a list of regions where nobody should ever be in, a list of source IPs where things are allowed to come from, a list of administrators, a list of administrator workstations, anything that you can think of, you can create a list from, and that list can be used in password management for a number of things, including the report that I'm just talking about. Okay, so that's the first one. We can do an instance, should not have a region equal something in the unapproved regions. The next one, of course, missing or incorrect classification tags. The GSL for that looks like instances should have tags that contain, and then I can do a regis match for exactly what my tag should look like. So it should start with 2 capital letters. It should be followed by 5 digits. I can customize this exactly that I want. So then I can go in and find out, is this tag there? Is it formatted correctly? Is it missing this piece or that piece? But once the tag is there, I can query these things very specifically and find out more information based on that. This one was a cute one. The customer wanted automation. I want to be able to automatically delete instances. I want to be able to change or quarantine those instances, but I do not want the CloudBot to do it immediately. I want the CloudBot to do it on a specific date, maybe 5 days from now, maybe 7 days from now during a maintenance window. And I want to be able to see a list of everything that is scheduled for deletion or to be placed in quarantine. And because if I have that, I have 3, 4, 5 days, whatever, to make sure that that is actually something that I want deleted, or that is something that I want to place in quarantine automatically. So it gives you a little bit of confidence on CloudBots, because you know that that very destructive CloudBot action is not going to happen immediately, but it's going to happen at a predetermined date. And I'm going to get plenty of advance notice of the items that are scheduled for that. And the way that we build it is on step 1, when we find the compliance that requires remediation, we just tag the item with a deletion tag or a quarantine tag. And then we have a second set of Lambdas or CloudBots that are running on a schedule, and we can set schedule for our functions using CloudWatch. And that schedule would say, run on Saturday at 2 a.m. or run Friday after 8 p.m. or run Sunday morning at 7 a.m. Whatever our maintenance window happens to be, we can have the Lambdas trigger at that specific time via CloudWatch. And then when it runs, it's going to look for that special tag, and it's going to go ahead and delete or quarantine everything that matches that tag. And of course, to show me in the dashboard everything that's going to be deleted come Sunday, all I need to do is have a GSL that says, please list on the dashboard any object that matches that special deletion tag. So again, having the system report us this is part of, or it's a capability that's built into the system. Some other things I talked about, hey, I want to know if somebody outside of my organization has a right to query my cloud or do something against it. In this case, I was looking for IAM roles that have the assume role capability and actually have an AWS account associated with that assume role that it's not mine. So, or in this particular case, if it's not empty, then it's going to show that I have something that role that actually is listing an AWS account in here. I can go a step beyond and specifically find out or have a list of approved accounts, and then have it report on anything that is has an account outside of my instance and is an account that I have not approved or pre-approved. So that's something that we can build. I was talking about the fact that we can do regis matches, so I can look for things like, hey, I want to find out every EC2 is specifically that's part of Project 178 that is not using an approved AMI, because we have that tag in there. I can look for project 178, which I know is positions 3, 4, and 5 of my tracking thing. And I want to make sure that the image that is used is on my generic list that has a list of approved AMIs that can be used. And I can build that list and use it pretty much anywhere. We talked about unallocated elastic IPs. And again, there's a GSL rule for that. Elastic IPs should not have an association ID that's empty or an instance ID that is empty. So if I have an IP, it should be associated to something or it should be associated to an instance. So all these things are things that you can create to show on the dashboard. If you notice, these are all single GSL commands. So, and we want the dashboard to report this to us 24/7 and be always showing us the latest and greatest. So the way that I did that is I generated specific one rule sets that are running continuously. And then I went to my dashboard filters and say, show me the results of this specific rule that I created that happens to be running. But I also found out that there's more than one way to skin this cat. Instead of having 20 or 30 single rule sets that are populating my dashboard, I can also have a single rule set that does it and put some sort of a marker there depending on what the finding is. And we're going to see that in a second. I'm just going to finish my last dashboard tips. My GSL command for finding user IDs that have not logged in the last 90 days is this one. This one is straight out of the best practices. I just liked it. So I just copied it and made a single unattached rule for it and I put it right on the dashboard. Again, we're talking about being able to report if we have our tracking taxonomy or classification tag. In this case, I'm looking at instances that were launched after a particular time, maybe the last 24 hours, the last month, the last 3 months, and have my tag including the value for my administrator, whether that can be just the code anywhere in the string or specifically on the first 2 characters, whatever it just happens to be. And then I put some sort of a constraint on it. The constraint can be something that causes a match to happen every single time. If I want to see everything, or if I'm only interested in the things that were created in the last month that are still running, because that means I'm paying for them, then I can list just those. I also wanted to put in here the route table one. Monitoring route tables is something that people don't usually associate with security. But if you are redirecting traffic using route tables so that they flow through an inspection point, it becomes part of your security. So I think it's kind of useful to have a little dashboard or a report that says, hey, find out if my production route tables associated with a specific VPC or connected to a TGW are not defaulting to my firewall inspection point. In this case, I did a rule, that's specifically looking for route tables that have a particular name or a particular tag. So they may belong to the TGW or they may belong to a production if this is AWS, and make sure that they have a route and that my default route is pointing to the interface ID of my firewall inspection point, or is pointing to the load balancer that leads to my inspection scale set. All those are things that we can do, and we can make sure that somebody's trying to modify those route tables and bypass our inspection points. Okay, so we were talking about more than one way to skin a cat. So the way that I did my dashboard originally was I created a lot of single rule looking for specifically the item that I wanted to show on my dashboard. But one of the things that we can do when we're listing things on the dashboard is to filter by certain things. We can filter by severity, and we have something there called category, which is usually blank, that we can filter by as well. So when we create a rule that is looking for something, we can assign a severity and a category to that rule. That means that we can filter on those 2 things when we're trying to show that particular result in a dashboard. So instead of having a single rule per rule set or per dashboard widget, I can have a dashboard rule set that has multiple rules in there that I want to query, but then have very unique categories for each one of those items. That category could say things like maintenance window. If I want to be able to list them on the things that should be on the maintenance window, it could have Elastic IP specific category. So when I'm listing things, I can look on all the tests that I'm doing for the specific rules that are testing for the Elastic IP information. And that means that I can then go to my widget and specify on the filtering what is it that I'm looking for. So let's see, okay, I guess it doesn't matter any one of these. If I go to settings, this is the important piece here. I am getting my systems from alerts that were triggered by my rule assessments, but I can then come here and add a filter, and part of that filter has categories as well as severity as part of it. So I can say, hey, I want to look for things that were acknowledged by me. I want to look for things that have this specific category. And then I can have a single rule set with multiple items that I want to query, and then filter for each one of these items specifically by looking for a specific category for them. So that's another thing that we can do. And moving on real quick. One of the things that I wanted to let you know is we keep GSL at the forefront of queries. Probably the Azure built-in policy checker is one of the most comprehensive ones in native cloud, but their top two things that people want to see is the ability to support regex matching and the ability to allow automatic remediation if they find out that something that should be deployed doesn't exist. And those are planned items. We have been supporting these two things for almost 2 years. So the nice thing is that we have a lot of tool power. We have a lot of features that are way beyond what you'll find in native cloud, even in systems that are pretty advanced for the most part. See, next. I'm going to talk for 2 minutes about Intelligent Essentials. Everybody should have, that has posture management should see that this is now available. And the nice thing is that it allows us to do GSL queries and has a lot of built-in GSL queries that are looking at the CloudTrail or are looking at events. And these are things like somebody's running API calls from an IP address that I don't recognize. Somebody's deleting my logs. Somebody's changing policies. Somebody's creating users. Somebody is creating roles that are way over permissive. All these things are part of the control plane, are parts of things of people logging into the Azure portal or AWS portal or running orchestrators and requesting things via the API that give them more control, more power, and the ability to query for these things, for looking for API event status that have been successful but have come from a malicious IP, or somebody is trying to assume a role and is doing a brute force and there's a lot of failures associated with it. Or maybe somebody actually succeeded in switching or taking a role, but he did it from a source IP that is outside of the organization. All those are things that we can query now. Everybody that has a CSPM got the ability to do this. And once we find these things on an alert, we can of course go in and find exactly what is it that has been happening in between the systems that are talking to each other. And that's what the Activity Explorer is going to give us, and the actual timeline of the items that those specific systems are doing. Whether it's just something talking to a load balancer, we can see that it's just basically registering with the load balancer and asking for help. But again, this is everything that's from the control plane and is being added to the things that we can do. We have 4 minutes, so I was going to talk a little bit about how to modify CloudBots, but we're running a little bit short on time. So I'm going to stop for a few seconds for questions. If there are none, then I'm going to talk for 2 minutes about how to create your own CloudBots and add them to the list.
Yeah, we got a couple. Keep cruising there, Gus. We'll get to them at the end here. I'm recording. Okay. We can go over a little.
Not a problem. So if you notice, I added a bot in here. If you go to CloudBots in AWS, and Azure will work a little bit different. In Azure, you can actually add your CloudBots to the GitHub and automatically update them. We've automated AWS a little bit more, so I got some questions about how do we add CloudBots now, since the scripts that we have or the buttons that we have are just adding the official ones. So we can look, we can go into Lambdas, because again, that is what CloudBots are. We can list for functions. We can look for the CloudBots in there, and it's going to show us this, which includes the directory of where our bots are stored. So all these are the CloudBots that we give you as part of the system. If this were Azure Functions, you will see a list of the Azure Functions that we give you. And this list is not static once it gets into AWS. And by that I mean, we can add scripts to this list. We can add functions to this list. And that's what I did. I basically went into File and created a new file. And I called that new file GusBot. That file was empty. So the next thing that I did is I pasted into this empty file my code, my CloudBot Lambda code that I wanted to run. I saved it. The moment that I saved this in here, this showed, hey, there have been changes done to my CloudBot list that have not been deployed. I just pressed the deploy button, which will automatically update this. And up here, under actions, I have a publish a new version of the system. The moment I do this, my CloudBot is now part of the CloudBots that I can call for automation. We can find it by just looking for a custom bot with the name of Gus_bot. You don't have to put the .py there. But it's a fairly straightforward system. If you have just a few bots that you want to add, you can just basically add them directly into the list and paste your code into the system, save, publish, and you can start using them. Questions?
Yes. Questions between the different cloud vendors, regarding tags or
yes,
any of these dashboards you showed. Are there any major differences between the cloud vendors?
Well, yes, there are. The nice thing, and I probably will do a follow-up showing the Azure GSL calls for customized dashboards. But the good news is that I am constantly looking for new GSL queries that are useful. If you try to play with the existing Azure reports and single out one or two that you want to put in the dashboard, and you cannot get the code to actually work, by all means, reach out to your cloud overlay team. Just send a question. We love to find out the list of things that people are looking for. We will help you get your GSL up and running and make sure that you can put that on the dashboard. If you're trying to create 300 of these, we might not be able to help. If you're creating one or two, the ones that you're getting stuck on, by all means, send our way, and we will make sure that we can help you build them.
Okay. Of course, looking for samples or documentation for your custom dashboard, tagging, CloudBot code. I mean, obviously, this is highly customizable.
Yes.
Do you have any examples, maybe?
Everything that I've showed here on the dashboard tips that I used to create these specific ones, I am going to basically send over to you so you can send this presentation that has these specific GSL samples. And as I go along, I'm going to be trying to maybe publish them in checkmates or have a sequel or a part 3 of this with even more examples, maybe a little bit more Azure bent, or anything that I find useful, I will most definitely share.
Back to your custom CloudBot, how do you test a CloudBot code before you push it into production? Make sure you're not doing something malicious to your own environment.
Okay, that's a great question. Remember, bots are really just functions in the cloud. In AWS, they're lambdas. In Azure, they're functions. But when you create this function, number one, you don't have to put it inside of the CloudBots folder until you know it's working correctly. You can have it standalone, and you can limit the access rights of that Lambda code or that Azure function to just a very specific test VPC or test area. And then you can create items in there, and then you can run the Lambda or run the Azure function against it. And it doesn't matter if it totally wrecks the stuff, you're running that code against a test environment. Once it's doing exactly what you want, then it's just a matter of going to your CloudBots and making it part of the list.
Great. I think that covers it for questions. Thank you again, Gus.
Sure.
I'm sorry, my phone is ringing.